Welcome back to the Theology of the Buddy Podcast, episode 31. In this episode, Chris is joined by Bill Dkystra, Byzantine Catholic and creator of the Hagios Dose Podcast, via webcall to discuss his converting from Roman to Ukrainian Catholicism and the importance of the example of the saints. They also share their own personal stories of Paul Sanders, a young Catholic man who died in 2008 who still inspires people today. We hope you enjoy!
This isn't awkward at all, is it?
That is not awkward. Just staring at a grown man on my computer.
Dude, welcome to the Theology of the Buddy Podcast. We're really glad to have you on, Bill.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, how are you, man?
I'm quite well. I'm coming after a cold, but that's okay. And we've had a busy October here with weddings and funerals, and so it's been a trip.
Yeah,
lately.
For sure.
So
for sure. Now
it's starting to get cold. Yeah.
Now, where are you again? You're in
Saskatoon.
Saskatoon. Okay.
Or Saskatoon.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome, dude. Awesome. So for our listeners who are just being introduced, so Bill is a long time. We've been kind of acquaintances, friends for a long time, but we had a very good mutual friend of ours. Actually, we have kind of a few mutual friends that
we had a few mutual friends. Yeah.
Yeah. So you and I just kind of got connected through them, and like I've been following your story for probably a good 10 years now.
Oh my!
My. I mean, yeah. So it's been kind of cool. Yeah. So
well, it's so funny because I just realized last night. I'm just like I grew up not too far away from you.
Yeah.
Essentially, my dad you're in St. Thomas, correct?
I am. Yeah.
And my dad was born in St. Thomas.
Wow, that's
there. You go.
Yeah. Yep. Now you grew up in Stratford, right?
I grew up in Goderich.
Oh, in Goderich.
Like in Huron County, like Goderich, Clinton area.
Yeah. So how did you get connected with our mutual friend, Father Steve Marsh, and Paul Sanders?
Core. It was through those core retreats back when we were in high school. That's how it all happened. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. That's cool. Mm-hmm. So Bill, tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay, so I first got serious into my faith in 2002, and it happened in and around my grandfather's passing away. He was a devout Catholic. He was a Knight of Columbus. And I had always associated him with being a devout Catholic, simply because he'd always put more money in the collection than anyone else I knew. Like when I was a kid, I saw $20 go into the collection plate, and I'm like, oh wow, Grandpa's into it. And so when he passed away, I was 17 years old and 17. And I was asked to be a pallbearer, and so I did. And I remember going up the steps to St. Joseph's Church in Clinton, and all of his brother knights were lined up the sides, and they all pulled out their swords and made an archway. And there was something about that image of walking through the archway of swords up into the church where I associated my grandfather's Catholicism with the fruits of his life that I'm seeing right here. And it was like, oh, there's something here. There's something about this. And a lot of people have their conversions and they're like St. Paul. They fall on their butts and they have, scales fall from their eyes. But I feel like for me, I had like a weird kind of conversion where it was like a dog that tilts his head to the side and he was like, oh, and so I kind of feel like my ongoing conversion from that has always taken that kind of characteristic as like a dog tilting its head to the side. And so from then on, I was involved in youth and young adult ministry for the next so many years. And then it was in I'm going to skip ahead a whole bunch, and I'm going to go to, I think it was 2016, if we're going to talk about my transfer to the Eastern Church, because I believe it was 2016, that year when Good Friday and the Annunciation lined up together. Maybe it was 2015, I don't quite recall. But anyways, I went to a Good Friday service, and then I was invited, because I believe in the Roman Church, they just transfer Annunciation to the next Sunday. Mm-hmm. But in the Eastern Church, they just do it all on the same day. And so I was invited later that day to a Ukrainian Greek Catholic parish here in Saskatoon to go to Annunciation, to their service. And when I came into the church, I noticed something. I've never seen this before, where what they do in the Eastern Church on Good Friday is they put out the shroud. Now, the shroud it has a depiction on it of Jesus entombed. And they put it up at the front on a little table. And when everyone comes into the church from the Good Friday service on, they get on their hands and knees and they crawl up to the shroud and they sign themselves 3 times and they put their heads to the ground as they approach it. And then when they get to the shroud, they kiss the wounds of Jesus. And then when they've finished, they back away on their knees, crossing and bowing 3 more times. And that image rocked me and made me feel, it wasn't like, that was like a very touching thing. It made me feel very uncomfortable. Because I think at that point I've been very comfortable in my faith. And I remember I didn't do it that time because it was like someone else's tradition and I felt awkward. But I remember that night being awake at like 2 or 3 in the morning when there are people who are still at the church who are venerating the shroud throughout the night. That's what they do. And I just kept thinking, why am I not there right now? And this one line that it kind of emerged out of my head, it was, it's not okay to not be holy. And I kept thinking that over and over again. And so what happened from that was I began to go to that same parish, and there's something about my Christianity that was like re-educated, that was maybe, I don't want to say brought to the next level, but it was, I think worship changes you. And I think that when we were starting to attend to the Divine Liturgy began to change us. Like me, and Sarah was my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. And I remember there was a point where we were talking about this transfer, and she's like, I can't argue with what has happened. She's like, I just can't argue with it. And so at one point, her and I are planning to get married, and I wanted to be married within the tradition that I've been going to church in. And so I made the steps for transfer. Do you want to hear about how that transfer process takes place, like logistically?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So what you have to do to transfer rights is that you need to send a letter to your diocese, your Roman Catholic diocese, and you have to ask for permission to do this. And you have to give your reasons. And your reasons have to be good reasons. They have to be for your spiritual benefit and all that kind of good stuff. You can't change rights because it's like, oh, I don't like Romans anymore or something like that, or, being sour. It's like they read your letter and the bishop decides, yeah, okay, it's okay for you to go. And when you write your bishop, when you write to your Roman Catholic bishop, you write to the Ukrainian Catholic bishop saying, hey, I've wrote a letter to them because I want to join your church. And then what they'll do is they'll notify the eparchy. The eparchy will say, as they did with me, come on in for a meeting. We'll get down to meet you. And this process can take up to a year. It didn't with me because I kind of hounded them a little bit because of my wedding. I wanted to get married in that church. So what happened was, it was really funny. It was in February, and I went to this meeting and I was really nervous because I'd never met Bishop Brian before of the eparchy. And it was like, for me, kind of climactic, like here's the moment. And it's really this legalistic thing that needs to get done, right? And I sit down with him and he looks at the letter and he's just like, yeah, I don't see why not. And that was it. I was just like, oh, I thought I was going to get grilled. I thought I was going to be, questioned. You just want to be a priest or something like that. But none of that happened. And so, so they send a letter and it's put in your file at the parish that you were baptized in, that this person is now an Eastern Catholic. And I love the Eastern Church. I love Divine Liturgy. I love our saints. I love everything about it. And it's really just a love for Jesus and a love of being Catholic.
Yeah. Dude, that's so cool. That's so cool. So Sarah, at least from the beginning of the podcast, was saying that she hasn't yet switched rights herself. Is that still the case, or has she made the jump?
Yeah, it's still the case. There's no practical advantage for her at this point because she's married me. She's technically, in the church already, just not on paper.
Okay.
And so there hasn't been that impetus to do that, but sometimes as a gesture she might want to do it one day, but yeah, she hasn't yet.
Yeah, that's cool. So one of the things that I thought was kind of cool too, listening to your podcast, was Sarah was saying that she was learning how to write icons. Is that still a thing?
Oh, totally. She has written 3 icons. She's done, you start with the guardian angel, and then you go to what she's done next. What did she do? She's done St. Nicholas and St. John the Forerunner. And so we have those 3 legit icons in our house. And it's so weird because to look at like a print of an icon, it's a beautiful thing. But when there's something that draws you in about a real hand-painted icon, that and it's so weird because it's like you can sit down with it and almost get entranced by it. It's so neat. And now she's working on Saint Michael the Archangel.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she's in a class and she's being taught right now, and it's kind of funny because I think I'm a little more industrial in my approach to things, and so. And her not so much, so I'm like, I just want her to pump out these icons, and we just have tons of icons. But no, it's a process, spiritual. So yeah, she's still writing icons, and I have big plans for my wife with her icon. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, dude, I gotta tell you, like for me, like I've always had a big love for the Eastern Rite and for iconography and things like that. I remember when I was in the 7th or 8th grade, shortly after I had my initial conversion or reversion, whatever you want to call it, I ended up visiting the Orthodox Cathedral in Washington, D.C. And and it is wall to wall icons, and I remember walking in there, and I feel like that was a turning point for me in terms of even just understanding what the liturgy is, because it just having the saints surround you as you're adoring God, it's such a cool thing in it. And our one of our previous podcast guests, Steve Picorni, he's also Eastern Rite, and he was saying, like how looking into the eyes of these icons, like we've become a culture that doesn't know how to connect with one another, and the just iconography itself it forces you to become essentially more human, because you are essentially looking into the eyes of these saints all through Divine Liturgy, and it's, yeah, I don't know. Like, do you find like that's the case for you, that like when you see icons that it leads you into a deeper sense of prayer and worship of God?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, the eyes will get you. Like, and it can be uncomfortable sometimes because you have this distinct feeling of not just looking at something, but something looking back at you and seeing you and all of your stuff. And so, for good or for bad. And so it can be uncomfortable, and it can be like pretty intimidating. So I know this priest who said that he just liked preparing the boards for icons, and that's all he really enjoyed doing for the longest time. And he realized it's because he was afraid to look upon the face of the Lord and stand before him face to face, that he was afraid of that. So he was just, delegating himself to the boards, and that's it. And so it was just like, dude, that's a slayer right there. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah, I just absolutely love it. And like, so when I heard that Sarah was learning that, I was like, what a gift that is for you as a husband too. And she's also like incredibly talented in other ways too. Like she's a musician, right? She does music stuff. Does music. Yeah. So cool. Mm-hmm. So cool. Yeah. So we hear often, especially since John Paul II, that famous line that the church needs to breathe with both lungs, the East and the West. I don't think that's really been realized. Like, how do you think, like, what do you think of that quote? And like, how do you think that quote can be better realized?
Well, you know what? It's kind of funny because after becoming Eastern Christian or like Byzantine Catholic, you realize that there's a great diversity amongst the Eastern churches. And so that line, breathing with both lungs, is like, it's not real. Like, we're like 1% of the church, I've heard someone say, so that's a really tiny lung. And also I think that I feel bad criticizing something the Pope has said. But like, for me, there's a lot more nuance than just another side of the lung. I think a lot of the times, I think you might be right that we're not realizing or really looking to the East a lot of the times as Roman Catholics, because I lived in Winnipeg for 10 years, which is the metropolitan see of Canada, and I barely came into contact as a young Catholic with the Eastern Church. And so I think that yeah, there needs to be a more nuanced understanding of what the Eastern churches are, because even saying like Eastern Catholic, like, yes, I'm an Eastern Catholic, but I probably have more in common with a Latin Rite Catholic than I do with a Syro-Malabar Catholic. Yet me and the Syro-Malabar are both Eastern Catholics, and so I just think that there could be a better education of what we actually are and the diversity, and to know that it's not just bilateral. And to know also that, a lot of the time these saints that I'm talking about every day that are from, the early times of the church, they're Roman saints just as much as they are Eastern saints. And so that's a shared heritage right there. And there's a lot more in common there than I think we realize. And so I think those are some of the things. And I think also when you learn about spirituality, in either camp, I think you start to realize that there's a lot of crossover. I know if you read, what's his name, Gula Grange?
Yeah,
Gula Grange. Sorry, I messed it up. But his 3 ages of the spiritual life. He begins with the purgative stage, right? I believe. Yeah. And that's all of the Eastern fathers as well. They say that the spiritual life begins with repentance and with tears. And so it's kind of funny that, we set up these dichotomies a lot of the time, and they're not really all that different. Maybe different in expression, but the truth isn't East or West. The truth is one. And so, yeah, those are just some things I think that your question kind of inspired in my head, because I'm always criticizing that line, breathing with both lungs, and I always cringe just a little bit when someone uses it. So it's very funny that you asked me that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I gotta tell you, like for me, like I find that I find a lot of life in reading stuff, even essentially from the Orthodox side of things, like the Philokalia.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that book so much. Well, it's not just one book; it's multiple books, but I just absolutely love it, and it always knocks me on my butt reading that. And like you were saying, the way of spirituality in both sides. Like you definitely, like if you read The Way of the Pilgrim, have you read that book? Right.
I started reading that book. I didn't finish it for whatever reason. I think I finished right before, or I stopped reading right before his trip to Jerusalem.
Okay. So I mean, even in his story, you kind of see kind of the lived experience of what you were saying, that he goes through those 3 stages of the interior life, it seems.
Yes.
And but again, it's not put in those Roman quote unquote terms. I think it's so cool, and I think we have a lot to learn from the Eastern Rite, and especially when it comes to things like the focus on repentance and the focus on conquering self, and destroying the vices, and the passions. You don't hear a lot of talk like that, especially in Novus Ordo circles. But I mean, you do hear it more so in the Latin Mass crowd. But even still, there's, I mean, how many times in the Byzantine liturgy do you hear "Lord have mercy"?
Totally, yeah.
There's that recognition of just that need for that repentance, and a constant recognition of our own sins. I just love that. So I kind of wanted to switch gears a little bit. So, like we said at the beginning, you and I share a few mutual friends, but in particular, one mutual friend by the name of Paul Sanders, who sadly passed away in 2008. And you wrote this really awesome blog that I'm going to link in the show notes, about him and about his about the way that he inspired you. When I was thinking about this podcast and the fact that what this month signifies, I was thinking about the fact that we don't just always have to look at people of the distant past, these great saints from 300 AD. We have people like Paul, who even to this day, if you go on Facebook, he still has a remembrance Facebook. People still go on there and ask him to pray for them, which is kind of an interesting thing to see. Paul, you really see that Paul in his Catholic faith. Paul was, from a very, from a young age, really took his faith seriously. But he became really, later on in his life, really became an inspiration to a lot of people. So yeah, maybe, I don't know, do you have any interesting or inspiring stories about Paul that you can recall that kind of inspired you in your own faith?
Oh man, he was such a big part of my becoming Catholic. Well, not getting into the Catholic faith. Really, I never had any biological brothers, but there's no question in my mind that Paul was my brother, because being so close to the man, and always our friendship, I think, was centered around that highest good that is God. I think that his time in Winnipeg, we were roommates in Winnipeg. I'll share this story where I think he really understood the little way. He was like my Saint Therese in a sense. Saint Therese is also my Saint Therese, but Paul was also a reflection of that, because he was a carpet cleaner in Winnipeg for years, and he really even carpet cleaning he internalized in a really special way, because someone asked him at one point what he would do if he was called to clean carpets at the Morgenthaler Clinic. And his answer today still makes me feel uncomfortable. His answer was, I would do twice as good a job, because no one will be changed. Because no one will be changed if we don't love. And that to me is just like this moment, this kind of very Pauline moment that always challenges me and makes me feel very uncomfortable, because there's a point where it's just like love makes you think dangerous things. And so that has echoed every time I think about Paul. Those are one of the stories. And there's actually has been a story that I remember Paul talking about in our kitchen one day, that it's been like reverberating for me lately, and it's very embarrassing because it's very emotional and like kind of mamby-pamby, but in the best way, because he was talking about the love of God the Father for his children, and our worship and our coming to God is like giving him a picture that we drew. And it's like, those things that kids draw where it's like scribbled and everything. It doesn't look like anything. And he looks at it and he says, this is amazing. I'm putting this up on the fridge. And that's what our worship of him and our prayers to him is like. It's like this dumb coloring, mess. But that he still honors it and he still loves it. And just reflecting on that, on the love of the Father, that he doesn't see us trying. And though we may fail, he doesn't want to punish us for trying. He loves us for trying. And that is something that I've been thinking about lately. And so Paul, in his little nerdy quips, it's still affecting me today. Yeah.
No, so one of the things that you said in your blog, and I found it incredibly well worded. So I want to quote it here. You said, there was a certain vivaciousness about Paul. He sought to integrate Catholicism in his life with a sense of carelessness. To demonstrate this point, in high school, he had illustrated a portrait of the world sitting in a well of a toilet with an arm reaching up to flush the lever. A little on the nose and adolescent, but you literally get the picture. He was someone unsatisfied with the status quo and was eager to accept an alternative to it. I found that so true. Like, so for me, like I grew up really in the music scene, like in the punk and the hardcore crowd. And I think of all the people that I've met, Paul was the only one who really truly personified what it meant to be punk. And I think he is what the punks desperately wanted to be.
Totally.
I think Paul in his very person just lived his life, like you said, like in a very detached way. He really couldn't care less what people thought of him, and he would defend Christ. He would defend the unborn with every ounce of his being. I recall one amazing story too, if I could share it, where so he and I worked in youth ministry. I was a youth coordinator at the time, and he was one of our core leaders, and we were driving one of our teens home after a retreat or something, and the teen was sharing how his teacher had said to him and to the class that there really wasn't anything special about Catholicism. All religions are essentially the same. And, as long as you love God and love people, then you're doing the right thing. And Paul, without skipping a beat, this is kind of like we were dropping off this kid, he turns to him and he says, next time you hear someone say that to you, I want you to yell at them, and I mean yell at them. Quit emptying the gospel of its power. And And I just,
Oh
again,
man.
that just has stuck with me for so long, that, whenever I'm tempted to give sometimes a very pastoral, quote unquote, answer and be afraid of offending somebody, I'm always reminded of Paul, because Paul really didn't care what the other person would feel. He wanted them to know the truth out of love, of course. I don't think you and I would ever say that we ever heard Paul preach the gospel out of anything but love. But you know what I mean? So I just, I found his life still to this day incredibly inspiring, and so, yeah, it's cool, like tying in back with what we were talking about before with your podcast. We have these fantastic examples of the saints, but there are saints in this world too that
Totally.
It's important that we shine the light on these people and whatnot, because especially in today's age, you don't get to see a lot of that, and so especially for me, when I've kind of felt lukewarm or whatnot in my faith, looking at the lives of the saints has been what reignites that fervor for our Lord. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I completely agree. I actually I've been reading this book. It's not really a book. It's more like a little tract on prayer and holiness, and it's by an Orthodox theologian, a recent one. He's really good. I think his name is Dimitrios, and he has this little tract on prayer and holiness. And I just found this because it knocked me on my butt, I think, when I read it. And so this is how it goes. It is the image of the living and personal absolute being who became man that is reestablished in the person of the saint. By being so truly human, he has reached a dizzy height of perfection in God while remaining completely at home with men. The saint is one who is engaged in free dialogue with God and with men. His transparency reveals the dawn of the divine eternal light in which human nature is to reach its fulfillment. He is the complete reflection of the humanity of Christ. And I read that and I was just like, wow. I was like, that is a very poignant and very articulate way, and I think very almost creative way of understanding what a saint is. Someone who is of both places. And I think that's how Paul understood his life, as someone who needed to occupy both spaces. That you're here on earth and you're completely comfortable with, being with people, being present to people, and yet being completely desiring to be in union with God. Both at the same time. I think that is a very interesting way of seeing Paul. And I think the nonconformity is like probably the main thing that I could see him being important for our day. Because when I wrote that thing from my blog, it was when Joshua Harris, that writer, and a whole bunch of other people were falling from their heights in the Christian world, renouncing their religion and all this kind of stuff. And I remember Paul having read that book and loved it. I did not read the book, but I was thinking to myself, what happened to this guy, who's now renouncing his faith and embracing the world? And what makes him different from Paul? What makes Paul different? And so it was that, I think, rebelliousness that he maintained throughout his life. And I think in a certain way, we all need to have that rebelliousness, even against our own selves. I think undermining our own very selves is the most punk thing you can do. Undermining your own sin and looking inside your own heart. And I think that we're so outwardly focused, and that's not a bad thing. Evangelization is good. Wanting to tell people the good news is good. But I think that when we understand that there is also an interior life that really needs to be occupied, we start to understand that, oh, when I fix myself, I fix the entire world, because we're all connected. And so when I let grace conquer sin in my life, that is world changing. Yeah.
Very true.
That's all I
Very
gotta say.
Yeah, no, it's funny too. Like, have you ever heard of Death to the World before?
Yes, I have. They're like an obscure Orthodox group, aren't they?
Yeah. So Death to the World was
that.
like, yeah, like it was kind of born out of the punk scene, and like it was a bunch of punks that discovered Orthodoxy and then all left and became monks, and then they would come back to shows and hand out zines. I don't know if you remember
amazing.
Zines, but they would hand like
zines.
Essentially Orthodox zines to the punk kids and like try to to bring them into the faith. But again, like you said, it is the most punk thing to battle the self and to rebel against the self. Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, so that was really the heart of what I wanted to talk about today is, right
on.
I think for our listeners, you don't underestimate the kind of impact that your own witness can be to the world too, and
totally, yeah.
Becoming a person who loves others and loves God above all things, like you can impact change in a lot of people's lives. So anyway,
totally.
Yeah, Bill, thanks so much for joining me, man. This has been great.
Hey, no problem.
Hey, can you tell us a little bit about how to get in contact with what you're doing? And yeah.
Well, me and my wife, we run the podcast called the Hagios Dose. It's kind of going through an identity crisis right now, because how it all started was I began doing the Eastern Liturgy of the Hours. Essentially, I was doing the hours, and we have tropars, which are like they're like antiphons, and they reflect whatever saint of the day it is. And so I was starting to read all these different saints and see all these different names that I've never heard of before. And so that was kind of one of the impetuses for me wanting to do the Hagios Dose. So like a daily saint of the day, which turned out to be way too much work. And so I only do them periodically. And Sarah, this was going on during Great Lent last year. And Sarah's like, I have an idea for a podcast and I want to call it The Sword in the Cloud. And I'd talk about this and that. And I'm like, well, let's put these ideas together. And so we have a swordinthecloud.com is the name of the main place where you find our website and maybe some blog posts eventually. But you can find the Hagios Dose, I think, on all the different podcasting apparati there are out there. And I'm going to be doing, I think, 2 a month for the next little while. Upcoming sneak peek, I think for November, we're going to do St. Josaphat and St. John Chrysostom.
Nice.
Yeah, I think St. John Chrysostom is going to be a big job, and I'm going to have to simplify it somehow because his writings are voluminous. So yeah. So that's how you can find us. That's a little sneak peek of what we're doing. I have a question for you.
Sure.
So all of these, I get some feedback every now and then, and people say, this was my favorite episode, or that was my favorite episode, and they always really surprise me because they're never my favorite episode. And you've been a listener, so which one would you say has been one that has stood out for you? Which saint?
So I know I really liked Saint Elizabeth the Wonder Worker.
Oh, very cool.
I like the original, like the ones in the beginning. I've listened to a bunch on like different platforms. So like sometimes I'll listen like on Spotify. Yeah, I mean the thing that I found very interesting was the so Saint Elizabeth the Wonder Worker and Saint George the Great Martyr, because that was that opened my eyes to really understanding Saint George in a way that I hadn't. So yeah, I would say those two. Like, Yeah, man.
What's really cool, and I was talking to Sarah about this last night. It's really cool doing these stories of the saints because in no other way, unless you're at a live interview, you're never being shown a person while that person is with you right there.
Right.
And so here you are listening to a podcast about, Saint Vladimir or, Constantine, and he's right there with you as you're listening to it. And there is no other experience that you're going to have unless you're at a live, interview of someone still living,
right.
Where that takes place. And I was just like, that's kind of a cool thing that I've never thought about before.
Yeah. The one on Saint Olga was also really good. I remember.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's one of those things where like not all the stories hit you at the time, but like sometimes, like you'll go back and you'll listen, and you're like, oh yeah, it's kind of like reading the scriptures too, right? Like you can read or like any spiritual book, you can listen to a story and it just doesn't necessarily click right now, but then you go back and you're like, oh yeah, dude, like this is the stuff, like
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting how saints they will follow you and they won't necessarily give up on you, but they'll find you when you're ready.
Yeah, totally.
Is there a Byzantine saint that you really absolutely love that has kind of captured your attention?
Oh man. You know what? When I did the episode on Saint Demetrios, I felt like a call almost. Like I felt like an impression that maybe I should do Saint Demetrios. So he's been one lately that's been kind of great, and he's not strictly Byzantine. One of our saints that I really love is Blessed Vasila. Blessed Vasila Velichovsky. He was in USSR, like Soviet camps, because he was a bishop in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And he was tortured and, brutalized for years. And then when he was released, they flew him to Winnipeg in 1979. Wow. And he lived a year. He lived a year there, and then he died. And I think it was maybe 20, 30 years ago, they dug him up, and he's incorrupt.
Whoa.
And he's in Winnipeg.
What?
He's in Winnipeg. I think there's a toe that was frostburnt or whatever. What do you call it when you're? Anyways, the toe fell off, but the toe was dead before he was dead. But he's incorrupt, and he's in Winnipeg, and I have a little icon on the wall of Blessed Vasila, and there are stories about him. Where after his time in the Soviet camps, when he came back and he came to Canada and he saw kind of the lethargy of the Canadian church, his homilies would just be him sobbing and crying.
Wow.
And I love Blessed Vasila. I spent time in Winnipeg. I've been to his shrine a few times, and he's someone that I think all Catholics, and especially us in Canada, need to pay more attention to. And if you're ever in Winnipeg, go to the shrine of Blessed Vasila at St. Joseph's Church. It'll be a real treat. Be an education. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to saints like that are incorrupt, like do they show, like do they have them in a glass casket or something like that?
I don't know. I know in Europe, there's all those, incorrupt saints that they have in those glass caskets, and you can go and see them, and some look better than others, But with Blessed Vasila, they don't have them in a glass casket. I don't know the details around that.
Yeah.
But they don't. They have him entombed, and you can go in front of his tomb and ask him for prayers.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does the Eastern Rite deal with things like relics and whatnot? This is totally tangential. But do they have the same kind of tradition like we would, where we put them in reliquaries and things like that? and then show them?
Well, I know that for our church, we do practice and have reliquaries. We have relics of two saints, Saints Olympia and Laurentia. Well, they're venerables, technically, I think, or blesseds. But they were martyrs in Ukraine during the past century. And we have some of their congregation here, and we've built an unworldly, beautiful, awesome shrine to them, where you can go for prayers every Sunday night and venerate the relics. And we have them in these gold little cases, and their breastbones are in there. We also have the ashes of an awesome saint, Blessed Amelian. He was a Ukrainian Greek Catholic priest and father of 6. And he died in a concentration camp, much like Maximilian Kolbe did, because he was hiding Jewish people, and he was faking baptismal certificates for them to say that they're Christians and all this stuff. And so we have his ashes, and I've definitely felt his presence at his ashes before. So there's that. When it comes to incorruptibles, I once read, and I don't know if this is true and practiced in our church, that if ever a monk or holy person is dug up and they find that, he hasn't decomposed, what they'll first do is pray exorcism prayers over the body and rebury them and dig them back up a month later. And so what the purpose is to make sure that this isn't some kind of trick of the devil. And so what faith is that? You dig up this holy person, and he's totally cool, and he's totally looking great, but it's but let's see if this is actually from God. It's that takes faith, I think. I'd be pretty eager to just be let's put him in a glass casket. But yeah, I read that somewhere. I don't know if it's actually practiced in universally, but
yeah,
that was just a funny thing that I remembered. Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. No, I want to be a saint someday. I don't know how possible it's going to be, but I really want to be a saint someday.
Oh, right. Yeah. You know what? When I was confirmed, I chose the name Bruno, Saint Bruno, and the Carthusians have this clause, I think, I don't know the correct way of saying it, but that one of the promises they make is that they'll never be canonized. That all of the good works they do will be for the Lord and not for their own glory. And I'm maybe I should put that in my will. But I'm Bill, who are you kidding? No one's going to be upset that you put in your will that, this guy can't be canonized. It just seems like false piety,
Yeah.
No one's going to be worried about you being too holy.
Yeah. And then there's Saint Therese, right? Who's I'm going to be a saint.
Yeah, there is, but it's just you are going to be a saint. Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty clear. Clear. Yeah. Cool, man. Cool. Awesome. Well, Bill, dude, this has been a fantastic podcast. Thanks again so much for joining me, dude.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for chatting with me and asking all your great questions. And I look forward to hearing more from you guys. I've been listening here and there, and I really enjoy it. The Thanks theology so of the buddy. You should use the word buddy more, though. I think that's my one criticism is that I don't hear "Hey, buddy" enough. Because
you're right.
You got to get that into your lexicon.
But that would just make us sound really Canadian, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, it would be.
Oh yeah, hey buddy, how's it going there, bud?
Oh, pretty good, pal.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out for a rip later.
You're not my buddy, friend. You're not my friend, buddy. I think that's I forget where that's from, but
that's funny.
Yeah.
Awesome, dude. Well, again, thanks so much, everybody. Definitely check out the Hagios Dose. It's on all platforms, pretty much, I think, for download. And you can find them on the Sword in the Cloud. And definitely follow. Do you guys have a Facebook page as well, or anything like that?
Totally,
social media?
We've got a Facebook page. The Sword in the Cloud is on Facebook.
Okay.
And so is Hot Dogs and Scotch, my blog.
Yes. Oh, definitely check out that blog. It's really good. You're a very gifted writer, dude. I love it.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely check that out. And yeah, thanks again, dude.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. Do you have a favorite saint that is relatively unknown? Message us on Facebook or DM on Instagram at Theology of the Buddy, find us on Twitter at TradFriends, or email us at theologyofthebuddy@gmail.com. You can also send us a voicemail via Facebook Messenger. If you like what you heard today, please consider subscribing to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to great podcasts. Would you also please consider rating and reviewing us on iTunes? We'd greatly appreciate it, as it helps us to get noticed within the larger podcast community. Next week, we are joined by Katie Ruvalcaba, a convert to the Catholic faith and live stream personality and food streamer. What made her convert? Mormons. That's right. If you want to know more, you're just going to have to tune in. Make sure you're subscribed so you'll know when it comes out. We'll save you a seat at the table. New episodes are released every Wednesday. So until then, stay tratty.